today. I want to take a minute to thank our collaborative sponsor and partner for this webinar that we're hosting, Backcountry Skiing Canada. We really appreciate working with you guys on this webinar. As I've mentioned, I'm co-hosting today with Maya from 57 Hours. She's joining us from Croatia. She's on the back end doing all of our tech support. You might see her pop on the screen in just a little bit. I am also co-hosting today with Jason. He is an IFMGA guide, and he is the founder of Lotus Alpine Adventures. Jason has been guiding professionally for over 20 years, anywhere from Colorado, the backcountry of Aspen and Crested Butte, all the way to Chamonix. If it has snow or rock, there's a good chance he's interested or has guided there. Today, he splits his time between guiding, photography, and overseeing guiding programs in Colorado and in Chamonix. It's his goal to provide his clients in the mountains an unparalleled and intimate experience. So we're really appreciative, Jason, that you are here with us today to share your knowledge. If you don't mind,
Thank
Jason,
you.
go ahead and switch to the next slide. Perfect. So I wanted to tell you a little bit more about 57 Hours today. If this is your first time hearing about us, we're going to give you a little rundown of what our name is, but also what inspires us as folks in the outdoors. So we're an online platform that connects people like you with professional guides just like Jason. If you want to get outside, please come to our website and find an adventure that works for you. But it's not only our goal to help folks find those adventures and find those professional guides, but we also want to help the guides grow and also protect our planet. I'm really honored personally to oversee our guide education fund. We're actually getting ready to announce $8,000 worth of scholarships that are going directly to guides that are in our network, which is really incredible. We're also a member of 1% for the Planet, and we give back to Protect Our Winters POW and Access Fund, which are two amazing nonprofits working in the realm to protect climbing spaces and combat climate change as well. So lastly, you might be wondering about our name, 57 Hours. What does that mean? Why did you choose 57? Why is it not 24? So what is 57 hours? That's the time that many of us have off from 3 p.m. Friday until midnight on Sunday. We truly believe in making the most of your time off. So whenever you do have time off, even if it's not within those 57 hours, we hope you make the most of it in the outdoors and explore in a sustainable and safe way in whatever manner that is. I know for me, I'm a weekend warrior. Those 57 hours are solid gold. I pack up, I might go to a hot spring, I might go camping, and I have a wonderful weekend. And I come home on Sunday, I'm maybe not relaxed and feeling so rested, but I'm ready for the week ahead because I got outside and I had a wonderful weekend. So before I pass this off to Jason, I just want to make sure really quickly, because we've had quite a few more people come in, that we know where our chat box is and also where our Q&A feature is. Our chat box is down at the bottom. That is a great spot for you to just to go ahead and put in different comments, things like that. If you need Maya or myself for anything during the presentation, you could reach out on there. And so we've already been using that a lot to introduce ourselves or to share what our plans are around the Haute route. We also have a Q&A box at the bottom. So the Q&A box is your spot to put questions. You can upvote other questions if you see one that you're like, yeah, that's the question I came to write. If you could use the Q&A box, since we're almost at 200 attendees, that's going to really help me streamline the Q&A session at the end. For those of you that are wondering, we are recording this, and this is going to be on our YouTube page after we're done. It usually takes about a week to put it up. So I think that's it. Maya, did I miss anything logistically before we kick off? No? Okay, awesome. Thanks, Maya. Thanks for being on the back end. Jason, I think this is all turning over to you. Just once again, Backcountry Skiing Canada, thank you guys so much. Jason, thank you so much. It's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. Really appreciate that introduction and appreciate everybody's interest in signing up and being here and going on this little visual journey with me on the Chamonix and Zermatt Haute route. It's quite humbling to see how many folks are interested. This is awesome. This is my first time giving a webinar, and I've been involved with 57 Hours for a few years now, and yeah, really excited to be here, and hopefully can give everybody what they are joining us for. Just a little bit about me. Stephanie gave a little bit of an intro. I'm an IFMJ mountain guide. I've been guiding since 1999. Colorado is for the most part home base. I've been working on skis and on rock in Chamonix since 2008. So a little bit over 10 years there. And guiding ski touring, I've done the Haute route many times with folks, as well as some of the other ski tours. I've guided around the world climbing and skiing, and worked in the snow sports industry. Kind of specifically, I spent almost 20 years in the little ski town of Crested Butte, Colorado. I've worked as a ski patroller, a avalanche forecaster, helicopter ski guide, avalanche educator, all those sorts of things. So I will give a little bit of the disclaimer that I am much more comfortable and probably a little bit more in my element in the mountains, interacting with folks with skis on my feet, than I am from behind a computer screen in a home office. But I'm going to give it a whirl and do the best I can. And my hope here for the next 45 minutes or so is to inspire folks with some maybe some stories, as well as some imagery from some of my photography stuff. So a little bit of inspiration, especially those folks that are in the dreaming stage to do this, as well as give a little bit of an overview of what the Haute route looks like on a kind of a day-to-day basis. And also helps planning stages. So understanding a little bit about the equipment that they need, the type of fitness, any kind of training, and where they're at, so that they can kind of, hopefully by the end of this webinar, have a better understanding of what folks will be getting into if they signed up for a Haute route in the future. So moving along, we're going to cover a bunch, and I'm going to do the best I can to take a week of ski touring across the Alps and jam it into a 45-minute slideshow here. So we'll do the best we can. But I'm going to cover a little bit just of the history, what the route is and the different variations, a little bit about the terrain that can be expected, as well as like what a typical day on the Haute route looks like. A little bit about the huts. As that is kind of what, especially for folks coming from the US or even Canada, it's a little bit of the European hut scene is a really specific kind of special thing that us in the Western Hemisphere don't really have opportunity to experience like people do ski tour in Europe. So talk a little about that, as well as specific equipments, trainings, and then looking forward to just the Q&A session and being able to interact with folks that way, and hopefully answer folks' questions. So real quick, as we kick this off, the Chamonix to Zermatt Haute route was first successfully completed in skis in 1911. Depending on what research you do, it could have been as late as 1924. There's some reports there, but the important thing really is that this thing's been going on for over 100 years. And that says a lot for just the inspiration that a journey of this type on skis kind of has, like the power that it holds, I guess, for folks to continuously, for 100 years be interested in doing this and continuously doing it, as well as improving on the style and the techniques and things like that. But the amount of history on the Haute route is a really cool thing, and just to kind of ski through places like that. So it was first chartered as a summer mountaineering route by members of the English Alpine Club in the mid-19th century. Haute route technically translate to high level route. And in 1911, it was first undertaken by skis. This is probably one of the most famous ski touring routes in the world, I would imagine. It uses this intricate network of high mountain huts that allows ski tourers to stay really high, between around 3,000 meters, and travel over substantial distances, winding through some of the highest and most dramatic peaks of the Alps, from the base of Mont Blanc and Chamonix, finishing across the roof of the Alps, as is known, to skiing below the Matterhorn and Zermatt. It requires, for the most part, pretty good weather. It definitely requires some favorable and stable snow conditions in regards to avalanches. That's why it is typically undertaken in the springtime. And it's a bit of a physical undertaking for sure, because it is continuous ski touring for 7 days in a row, day after day after day in the mountains. So roughly half of folks that do start the Haute route sometimes don't finish for various reasons of fitness or weather or avalanche conditions or other things. But our goal is to help folks be prepared enough to complete it. So there are many different Haute routes in the Alps, and the the term haute route, like I said, which means high level route, it's kind of a generic term for high level route between one place and another. So there's many different haute routes, but the Chamonix and Zermatt one is kind of taken over as like the generic official haute route when people refer to that. So a little bit of nomenclature there, but it refers to this week of high altitude skiing between Chamonix and Zermatt. So it's a springtime traverse. So these huts that allow this to be completed are only open generally from sometime in mid-March through middle to end of April. So somewhere around a 6-week kind of window. It allows for more stable avalanche conditions, which is a big part of what allows this to be undertaken. Knowing that it's done in the spring also, I would say one of the biggest things about the haute route is the weather patterns and the potential tricky ski conditions as a snowpack is in a transitional state. So generally folks need to be pretty high level, intermediate or advanced skiers that can get through all different types of snow and have a fitness to kind of travel day after day. However, the rewards for all that are mornings like this, where it's starting off cool, crisp, snow and sky and air and watching sunrise over the Alps. It's a pretty spectacular place, just moving through the mountains and seeing this type of scenery. There's opportunities for summits along the way to get these expansive views of the Alps, which are pretty amazing. You can see here in the distance is the Matterhorn behind me and my client, where we're headed over the next couple of days. For those of us that ski, especially in the United States, like we don't get a lot of glacier skiing. It's just really not in the terrain in the US. It tends to be more in places like Alaska, Canada, or the Alps. And therefore, the ability to ski through this special type of terrain, getting up close and intimate and personal with glaciers, and what it's like to ski next to some ancient ice that's millennial old is super cool. It's just really adds a really special kind of ambiance to the experience. And it's like nowhere else that really you can really achieve that. And it mixes different things in regards to mountaineering and skiing and travel through the mountains in general with like navigation and fitness and all that kind of stuff. So we get to put all the pieces of the equation together and head out on a journey with like a destination in mind of completing, going from point A to point B over a certain time frame. So it really is like an inspiring adventure. And what makes it so special really is these huts along the way. So it's typically done in 7 days with a bunch of different huts along the way. And these are like large guardian huts, meaning there's hut keepers there that live there during the ski touring season. They cook, they take care of bedding, all this sorts of stuff. It's one, it's a nice refuge and reward at the end of the day. It's a goal to get to at the end of each day. And then like the social scene, just the kind of vibe going on of hundreds of ski tourists from around the world are all congregating in this certain places as people are doing various different traverses or on various different routes. It's such a cool experience to have such a melting pot of cultures and people from around the world, and pretty much having the common thread of all loving skiing and getting to share in a similar ski experience, and then share, what makes it unique for all of us from different cultures. So it's really such a special thing for that reason. Typically, the haute route is roughly around 140 kilometers. It is done in 7 days, usually, from leaving Chamonix to arriving in Zermatt. Typical days of ski touring might be anywhere from 4 to 7 hours of moving up and down. And the climbing days can be anywhere from 700 to up to 1,000 meters of climbing, or possibly more if little add-on bonuses need to be done. The nature of the haute route is the days get longer and a little bit bigger as the tour goes on. So really kind of having the fitness to do this day after day is pretty key, because the days kind of build up and get longer and higher altitude as the tour actually goes on. And then because we use some of the infrastructure of the lifts and things like that in the Alps in Europe, some of the descents we have in between legs of the tour can be up to 2,000 or more meters in descents. So it offers a lot of different types of challenge in skiing there. There's many variations of the Haute route. What I'm going to talk about specifically today is the one that I am most familiar with and that I have done the most, and tends to be the one that is guided the most, as well as the Verbier variation. And what that means is there's a road break. So it's kind of two sections. There's a Chamonix over to this Swiss village of Champay section that we'll talk about. That's usually done as 2 to 3 days. And then there's a taxi around to the Verbier ski resort. And then from the Verbier ski resort, the next section of 4 or 5 days to Zermatt are kind of taken as more pure ski touring as it goes. It is typically undertaken the most because it tends to be known as the one that has the most amount of skiing travel. Again, this is a traverse much more than like a powder skiing adventure, so to speak. So it really is like a getting from A to B. And the Verbier variation allows for the most skiing. There's the classic Haute route, which is a slightly different variation that goes a little bit more to the south and west for the middle section. It also has a road break from the town of Champay, but it takes a taxi to the village of Bourg Saint Pierre. And then from there, climbs a little bit of a different route. It's a little bit longer, a little bit more mountaineering, and therefore it's undertaken a little bit less than the Verbier variation. And then finally, there's the Grand Louis, which is like the purest form of the Haute route, where there's no road break, and it is skis on your feet from Chamonix all the way to Zermatt the whole time. This one is much more mountaineering based. There's a lot of climbs with long climbs, some with skis on your back, like boot pack, ice axe, crampons. It has a little bit less downhill skiing and much more kind of traversing and mountaineering. It's also way more committing in regards to weather and fitness. And it's much harder to escape from. So therefore, it's undertaken probably the least. And usually when it's guided, it's got a smaller ratio, sometimes maybe 3 or 4 folks to a guide, versus the Verbier might be as much as 5 or 6 folks. So we're going to be focusing mostly on the Verbier, but just wanted to bring attention that there's many different variations there that can go along. The Haute route begins in the Chamonix Valley and in the town of Chamonix, which is kind of known as the French capital of alpinism, if not the world. It's just like a skiing, climbing mecca, and just a phenomenal place. As a kid growing up, I grew up in New England, and I must have played over and over hundreds of times my VHS tape of Blizzard of Oz, which was a bunch of American pro skiers, Glenn Plake being one of them, that took this adventure over to Chamonix and just blew their minds and recorded it all. And as a young, formidable kid, it set me on my path to probably this is why I'm doing this today. And so it really is just such a like special historical place to kind of experience if you're any kind of skier. It starts right below the north face of Mont Blanc there, pouring into town about 4,000 meters above the village of Chamonix. And then 140 kilometers later, we ski down below the north face of the famous Matterhorn, probably the other world-known alpine climbing village of Zermatt, Switzerland. And we literally travel below the north face of the Matterhorn, right onto the ski runs and right down into the village of Zermatt, and then walk to our hotel with our boots on our feet and our skis on our shoulders a week later, hopefully. One thing that tends to be overtaken a lot, especially for folks that are not European based, so more Western hemisphere, where traveling to the Alps can, not to mention just travel troubles, but it can also have like all the jet lag and things like that come with it, is a lot of times people like to ski the Vallée Blanche. So this is just a day trip out of Chamonix. It is one of the world's probably most famous backcountry ski runs, being over 3,000 meters from the top of the lift down into the town when conditions allow, something that maybe is being affected by climate change more than we would like these days. But it's a great shakedown tour. It parks you in Chamonix for a day to just kind of like suss out the gear, get over the jet lag, get familiar with what it's like skiing on glaciers with a harness and crampons and crevasse rescue gear and all that kind of stuff, and get you a piece of history of this just phenomenal ski run. So for some people, this is their first time of kind of skiing over in the Alps, or on this type of terrain. We ski below some of the world's most famous climbing features and steep skiing mountaineering features that have shaped both the sports over the years. So it's a great place to kind of shake off the cobwebs and get the group kind of all jiving and ready to go. Personally, for me, as a guide that comes from the US, I think it's really helpful to have the shakedown day so that folks aren't immediately getting out on a ski tour and then figuring out little kinks on the way. We kind of have an opportunity to deal with all that in Chamonix, do any last minute adjustments as needed with gear, equipment, any kind of that stuff before heading out. So I've kind of broken this webinar into two sections. So because it's about mostly the Verbier variation, there's the first couple days from Chamonix to Verbier, and that's kind of referred to as section 1 because of the necessary taxi transport road break to get from Champay over to Verbier. And then I'll talk about a section 2, which is the Verbier to Zermatt section, and there we kind of will finish with. So typically this is done by folks as days 1 and 2, or maybe all the way day 3, depending on the exact itinerary that's taken. There's a lot of options, but we will jump on a bus from downtown Chamonix and just cruise up valley to the little village of Argentière and the ski area on the Grand Monte. And then we get some lift access, and we'll ride some lifts and then head up to the Argentière Glacier from there, and which you can kind of see here on the left of the photo. And then we have a couple options from there. Some folks will choose to go up the Argentière Glacier to one hut. Other folks might cross it and go up and over to the next hut right away. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But it starts us with some lift access right from the very beginning as we kind of head off. From day 1, we kind of get a good view of looking to where we're heading. This is probably one of the more famous spots on the Haute route is the Col de Chardonnay there, the little notch in between the Aiguille de Chardonnay and the Aiguille de Argentière. This might be undertaken, like I said, on day 1 or day 2. This is one of the options, probably one of the more famous ones, because it has a very long rappel off of the back of this notch. So a little bit committing when you drop off the back of that, and you kind of end up, that's the border a little bit with Switzerland. So you end up in Switzerland there, and then you're kind of committed to going down off that side. There's another route just a little bit down the valley from this called the Col de Passon that has become a little bit more in favor because it doesn't have the mandatory rappelling, which has gotten worse with climate change and glacial melt, unfortunately. But it involves a long boot pack with crampons and ice axe as well to just take the different route. So right away in the beginning, I would say that kind of packs its technical punch right from the very start in the first couple of days. This is usually our intro into skiing on big glacier ice. When we could ride to the top of the Grand Monte before in 2019 when that lift burned down, unfortunately. We'd ski down the Rognan Glacier. It's still possible to do this with some extra skinning to get up there, but it's an introduction to just kind of skiing down some big glacial terrain and starting off on our tour from here. Interestingly enough, a little side note, years ago, I was departing on this exact run down the Rognan Glacier from the Grand Monte to kind of kick off a group with the Haute route. And lo and behold, I had the pleasure of riding the tram and skiing this run with Glenn Plake, and got to share with him how, 30 years prior, he had shaped my life by skiing this. And it was a pretty cool experience to then get to ski next to the man in the Mohawk on this tour as well, too. It felt like life had come full circle at that point. So this first section between Chamonix and Verbier is typically done in 2 to 3 days, like I said. And it tends to be a little bit of a punch through the Col de Chardonnay or the Col de Passon. One option is folks will go up the valley and have a fairly short day and stay at the Argentière refuge. A little bit of a smaller refuge. The Argentière Basin is really famous for the north-facing kind of alpine climbs that history has there. And so it allows for a short day with some lift access skiing. And then what's typically nice about starting with the Argentière refuge is it allows you an afternoon as a group and as a guide, maybe to go and practice some crevasse rescue skills and just kind of get everybody dialed up technically before attacking either the Col de Chardonnay or the Col de Passon technical climbs the next day before moving over to the next refuge. Either way, the next day is an early morning if you leave the Argentière hut. If you don't stay at the Argentière, then you just go from the across the glacier and directly up to the Col de Chardonnay. So either way, it's a super early start, whether you're going to link the first 2 days or leave the hut early in the morning. And then here's a view looking down after the rappels of the Col de Chardonnay on a powder day. Ski traverse here, so you can see it's kind of this long couloir down the glacier there. Either way, if the Col de Passon route is undertaken or the Col de Chardonnay, it leaves you traversing the massive Triant Plateau here. And this is our crossing into Switzerland for the remainder of the tour. And we cruise across the Triant Plateau and stay at the Triant hut. And here it is, just kind of on a map to give people a little bit of an example. Here's the Argentière refuge. The Grand Monté lift is over here, kind of out of the picture. So either people will go up to here, spend the night, or they'll kind of cruise over the Col de Chardonnay or the Col de Passon, which is down here, and then traverse along. This is that photo of the Triant Plateau or the Triant hut from there. And then the next day's ski around the Verbier, you can see from behind the Triant Plateau goes down the Val d'Arpet, which is after a short climb to the Col de Escondie, down this long valley. It's about a 2,500 meter descent all the way to the village of Champay, where we catch a taxi around the Verbier. So in the morning we leave, short ski out of the glacier down the Triant hut, climb over the Col de Escondie, and then which typically is might be crampons and boots. The last time I did this was all melted out and dry rock and fixed ropes. So a little bit of technical action there to climb up. And then we get this long ski down the Val d'Arpet, like I said, that's about 2,000 meters or more. And typically might have all types of ski conditions. I've left this one where I've skied a foot of powder in the morning, and by the time I got down the end of the valley, it was like rainy and wet, and just kind of like all different types of snow conditions all in between. So, but we get this beautiful long descent after all the hard days of climbing, for well over 2,000 meters. And then we grab a taxi and we cruise around for an hour-ish or so to the Swiss village of Verbier, which is known for its ski resort. And here, you know, this is typically day 3, maybe day 2. It allows us to do a quick little resupply if we need for any types of gear. If people are feeling like they want to switch stuff out or whatever, that can be done. We'll usually resupply some snacks, and I'll talk about what needs to be brought at the end of this, but we can grab some snacks for some lunches, coffee, whatever it might be. And then we grab some lift tickets and we cruise up and ski around the Verbier ski resort. And then we'll finish staying at a hut on the Verbier ski resort that night. And then from there is the final push for the next 4 to 5 days over to Zermatt. And that brings us to section 2. So this is the Montfort hut, which is high on the Verbier ski resort. In the daytime, this is just your typical kind of ski resort lodge where people will ski in and have lunch and coffee or wine or beer and take a break. It transitions into like an overnight hut refuge for folks that are on the Haute route specifically. So it's great. It has, you know, it's pretty close to the front country. It has showers, it has Wi-Fi, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, which is typical of many of these huts, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But great spot. And then early in the morning, the next day, we will skin out of the Montfort hut and kind of do a big climb out of the Verbier ski resort with a bunch of transitions kind of going up and down, some long climbs, and then some long descents, and then some long climbs, and then some long descents, skiing ourselves around many transitions throughout this day. All of it, you know, roughly around the 3,000 meter mark, all alpine skiing, which makes, you know, this trip so specific and special. There's no trees for those of us that ski. In the Western Hemisphere, there's no tree skiing. It's all glaciers or just kind of wide open alpine ski terrain. Sometimes we get lucky and have like amazing powder skiing and bluebird skies. Not always, but sometimes. So when those opportunities are there, we definitely like take advantage of it as best we can and maybe add some bonus laps into the route. There's tons of opportunities there for slight detours all over the place. Sometimes conditions can be quite challenging, and just the navigation of getting from point A to point B from hut to hut is all you can kind of put your head down and focus to do in bad weather. And sometimes I would say this is where the guide really becomes important, as visibility can be tricky with no trees, glacier skiing, crevasses, route finding, all that sort of stuff. One of the things about the Haute route is, it gets pretty booked with the huts, and therefore like you don't always have the opportunity to just kind of stay in a hut for another day if the weather's bad. Everybody is moving on a point A to B traverse. So sometimes the pressure's just kind of on, like you have to leave the hut and you have to get to the next hut. There's not an option to necessarily stay where you're at all the time. So sometimes it's not all bluebird and powder skiing, although that's what we prefer, no doubt. I'm from Colorado, so I don't do well when the sun's not shining and I can't see where I'm going when I'm skiing. But along the way out of the Verbier, when we leave the Montfort hut on Verbier and head towards the Prof Lery hut, for that day, we kind of ski by the Launch, which is one of the easily accessible summits along the way. 3,000-meter summit, very popular with ski tours. Some people attempt this out of the Verbier ski resort just for the day, but it's an awesome opportunity to kind of have a big summit along the way that we can get to easily with skis, and then have a nice long summit ski for probably 1,000 meters down to the Prof Lery hut, and then kind of finish the evening at the next hut and settle in, have some dinner, enjoy the company, meet some other folks along the way, share some stories, enjoy hopefully some scenery like this where we get, to spend the night in these special places up high in the mountains and get to watch the transition of the day happen from sunrise all the way to evening time and sunset while we've been kind of moving through the terrain, which is quite special. And then the next day we leave the Prof Lery hut and we head over to the Les 10 hut. And this typically requires a very early morning start, as we have to traverse around this dammed lake. And there's a lot of south facing slopes that hang above it. So in the springtime, there's a lot of kind of wet avalanche danger there. So this is one of the days where we leave the hut super early in the morning and try to get around and underneath all this south facing avalanche danger before things heat up and the avalanche danger rises throughout the day. So it's kind of a day of moving and traversing. Depending on how the route goes, sometimes folks will detour down into the village of Arolla, which is like a tiny little ski resort village, and kind of base out of there and stay at a hotel. This is the Pas de Chèvre, which or known as the goat step, some ladders that literally you have to kind of climb up off the glacier to get out of the glacial valley to get down to the village of Arolla. This is actually an image of me having to do this one year when I snapped my ski in half to go find myself a new pair of skis in the village of Arolla, where only like it can be done in the Alps. We were able to pull in and like a Formula One pit stop, I was able to buy a new pair of skis, get them mounted, and continue that afternoon with our touring. And it was a slight detour variant from what we had planned, but we were able to salvage a broken ski and continue on to complete the Haute route, despite getting thrown some challenges there. Otherwise, if we kind of would just travel on as we would go, we would head up towards the 10 hut, which is like this massive stone structure. It allows for some awesome powder skiing to be had, or spring skiing around it on the La Louette and some of the other peaks like this. So this is a hut that, because we've left early in the morning to get there, because of the south facing slopes for avalanche danger, it allows us to kind of get to the hut earlier and chill out and some wine or beer or lunch, and then kind of travel really light and go make some just pure ski turns around the hut in the afternoon. Day 6, leaving from here. This is one of the bigger days in regards to elevation. So Some folks will either leave the Dees Hut and travel down to the village of Arolla over that rocky step I showed, or most folks will travel up and over the Pina de Arolla, and this is the highest point on the Haute route. It's a 3,800 meter summit, and has some crevasse danger, some steep travel. Ski crampons are necessary, as well as sometimes maybe boot crampons and an ice axe, depending on conditions. And it's a big day of altitude. You can see like everybody here leaving the hut. Some days on the Haute route, you get really lucky and you kind of find yourself in your group and feel like the mountains are just yours. And then other days, you're part of the train of folks and everybody's trying to get to the same place. And it's just kind of a social endeavor. And it's, in some regards, it's not really worth trying to beat everybody there because there's always someone ahead of you, it seems. But so here's the crew all leaving from the hut in the morning to get this ascent of the Pina de Arolla over to the Vignette Hut before weather comes in that afternoon. And man, when the skies are clear and the weather's good, it makes for some just phenomenal views along the way. I highly recommend, if anybody travels on the Haute route, it's definitely worth investing in a real camera. Although iPhones do a great job these days, carrying like some real cameras on this is like the images you'll come away with will be framed on your wall like they are on mine and with you forever. So here's a view of climbing up the Pina de Arolla here. You can see like people are doing some powder ski laps. There's groups from all over the place. One of the coolest things about the huts, like I'll talk about in a little bit, is just like I mentioned, the camaraderie and the culture and ski culture from all over the world. One year I was able to stay in a hut with my group and we were able to share our dinner table and evening conversations and all that with a Sochi Olympic medalist in the biathlon from the Czech Republic, who was just like an awesome young kid in his early 20s. And it was so cool to just have to sit down and share an experience like that with someone. And when you get to sit next to an Olympian in the middle of the mountains at a hut while you're on a ski traverse, it's just totally unexpected. Needless to say, the next day, as we were climbing up the Pina de Arolla here in this picture, he came blazing by us, completing the entire Haute route in 3 days. And I think his heart rate was barely over 50 beats as he was passing everybody here at almost 4,000 meters with a smile. But it was a pretty cool little memory there. And then once the summit of the Pina de Arolla is achieved, you have this long ski down to above the Otema Glacier here and to the Vignette Hut. And again, it's like we're almost 1,000 meter descent. It can be spring ski conditions or powder conditions, depending on the season and the year. It's hard to say. But that parks you at this, one of the more famous huts on the Haute route, which is the Vignette Hut here, which I've circled on the edge of the cliff there. Despite what it may seem on the scale, this is typical to many of the huts in the Alps and on the Haute route. This hut sleeps well over 100 people. And it's quite the spot. However, it's also, as you can see there, in bad weather, the hut can be quite easy to miss and people can continue to keep skiing down the valley below the hut. There is a bunch of steep slopes right below me where I took this photo that can present quite a bit of avalanche danger if it's stormy conditions. And it's actually, unfortunately, one of the spots on the Haute route that's been the site of some accidents over the years. Avalanche accidents, people getting lost, not finding the hut, all that sort of stuff. So again, everything seems quite peaceful and unicorns and powder when it's bluebird days out, but when the weather gets quite bad, things can get quite serious quite quick. And this is a little bit of an example of one of those spots. Then we leave the Vignette Hut, and this is the last day. So here it is on the map, going from left to right, just to give folks some scale. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the last day of the Haute route. So we ski from the Vignette Hut down into Zermatt, and it's the biggest day. We cross, I believe it's like 5 or 6 glaciers. We go over a couple different cols, and the mileage I want to say is around 20 kilometers. But it's also a giant descent mostly, but it's a big day. So we leave the Vignette Hut early, a bunch of technical climbing to do with some boot packs up and over a couple of the cols, and then this like massive ski descent down the Zermatt Glacier, as you can see there, into the village of Zermatt. Sometimes it's just miserable, cold, wet, windy, snowy, and a whiteout. And this is what the travel might be like to get from A to B throughout the day. And it can make those days feel quite a bit longer for sure. This is that same day climbing the Col de Brûlé, which is one of the climbs you have to do out of the vignette hut as the storm starts to clear. But you can see deep snow, ice axe, crampon, skis on the back, putting in some physical effort. This is on day 7. So, you know, folks are starting to get a little bit tired. This is where the fitness is really important to it all. But sometimes you're also just blessed with like amazing bluebird skies and clear weather. And this is the other col that we climb over, the Col de Valpelline, and you can see there the Matterhorn in the background. So some days it's easier travel, other days not quite as easy and a little bit more challenging. But regardless, along the way, we are rewarded with awesome glacier skiing next to some of the biggest and most famous peaks in the Alps. Just incredible scenery. Usually when conditions are bad and navigation can be quite tricky, it does mean that there is the opportunity for some powder skiing when things stabilize and clear up. And when things are bluebird and clear, it's offers the opportunity maybe more for some spring style ski conditions and just like incredible scenery, as here with an image of a skier traveling below the north face of the Matterhorn on our last day. And we enjoy a big, long descent on into the village of Zermatt with tired and weary legs. And hopefully, if all goes well, 7 days later, this is our group walking through the streets of Zermatt, skis on our back, skis over our shoulders, packs on our back, ski boots on, literally walking right to the hotel from where we left Chamonix 7 days prior. It always gives me a little bit of a kick to be walking through Zermatt. Obviously, it's a ski town and a ski resort town. There's skiers everywhere, but there's also tourists from around the world. And walking down the street next to tourists that are just in their normal tourist clothes, checking out the Matterhorn from the streets of town and and they have no idea that what we have just done. And the people that you walk past in the alleys on the streets there, it's like, wow, if they have any idea what we just traversed and accomplished for the past week. It's pretty cool. And knowing that that scene just plays out kind of day after day on the streets of Zermatt and Chamonix throughout the spring touring season. So I'll backtrack a little bit here, just in the way that I kind of wanted to design this webinar about like the information, and talk now a little bit about like the hut specifically, and then a little bit about like logistics and equipment and training and whatnot. So these huts, for those of us in the Western Hemisphere, especially in the US, these huts are much different than we're used to. They're a little bit more in line with Canadian style lodges, or just kind of the way the huts are in the European Alps. But they're massive structures. The Haute route, they sleep anywhere from 75 to 150 people. They offer safety, camaraderie, food, warmth. They are guardianed full-time during the ski touring season by folks that live there. They cook. It's bedding is already provided. There's like duvets that they work like restaurants. Everything is helicoptered in and out. So it's run like a business, usually owned by the Alpine Club of the country and then leased out by retired mountain guides sometimes to provide a service. So it's something that's just like so unique, especially to American ski tours, where you have these like massive, beautiful buildings that are built in the most spectacular spaces in the mountains. And then you get this social atmosphere from folks from all around the world. And then you have all the creature comforts of if you were living in a city where you have beer and wine and home cooked food. You get a 3-course predetermined menu deal at dinner, and you don't have to carry your bedding. All that stuff is provided for you. Some of the huts have showers, some of them have Wi-Fi, like I said. It's just this amazing experience to just travel day after day with just your ski touring gear on your back and maybe an extra change of clothes, and then have all this kind of support along the way, which especially coming from the US, we don't have. A little bit of an example of the scope and scale of everything like I was talking about. This is the deck of the Ladies hut right here, below the Pina de Arola. And for scale, this is a picture of that same hut, kind of from up the valley on the La Louette. So this hut sleeps, I believe, 125 people. And when you start to place it in the terrain of the Alps like this, you kind of realize the scale of everything and just how kind of awe-inspiring it is that you can ski in this terrain and have this type of accommodation. They're busy and they are crowded for sure. But if you know this going into it and you're not looking for kind of like an escape solo experience, and you accept that like you're traversing on a piece of history here that's been done for over 100 years, and you're going to meet people from all over the world, it's this awesome social atmosphere, and you get to just enjoy this pretty cool experience. And usually as well, I always can pick out the Americans here on the ski racks because they're the only ones that have skis that are usually 100 waisted or bigger. So as you could even see in this picture, you could probably guess who the American ski tours are, as typically it tends to be narrower, shorter skis that are preferred over there for this type of skiing. Here's an example of some of the bunk style lodging, just like dorms with duvets and pillows already there. Some rooms might have 4 beds, some rooms might have 40 beds, but it's pretty nice to just have your little spot and have all the stuff taken care of for you. Usually they're all 3-course meals that are kind of predetermined menu that are set. They do handle vegetarian very well in the huts, but this is just typical kind of dinner scene at one of the smaller huts with a bunch of different groups crowded in and having great home cooked meals, sharing stories, meeting people from around the world, all that. Again, this is a picture of that vignette hut, which is one of the more popular ones. This is an example of just kind of some of the lunches you start buying along the way as you're starting to burn way more, getting a way more calorie deficit than you started with. This is probably the most famous dish called a rushti. It's like a Swiss potato, cheese, egg goodness that just, this will power you day after day for sure. And highly recommended. Some of these other huts are an experience in and of themselves. The Bertol hut tends to be a little bit smaller. It's sometimes undertaken in addition to the vignette hut to make that last day a little shorter. Sometimes it's taken as an alternate to the vignette hut. But a mix of climate change, melting the glacier, and making the hut a little bit higher and higher and more accessible is where it's perched for ease of ability to find it and safety. Here's an example of like actually having to rope up and climb this massive ladder system to even get into the hut where you're going to spend the night. So again, the technical skills don't just come across in the glacier. Sometimes they come from just like, how do you even get into the hut? And then just a typical scene in the hut. Some people spend the afternoon chilling out, playing cards, taking naps, drinking wine or beer, or just socializing, or maybe they go ski touring afterwards, depending. The final part here we'll talk about a little bit for folks is the equipment and the logistics planning. And this is kind of probably like one of the more complicated parts of undertaking the Haute route, I would say, is just like the logistics of getting from A to B. So starting with the equipment, and this photo was taken from the web. It's not mine. It's courtesy of Mountain Adventure Company, another group that guides this. But I would say this is the pretty typical Haute route kit that I wanted to go over with folks. So you have your lightweight ski touring skis, 100 millimeter waisted skis or less are preferred. Anything bigger than that is just, it's a little too much. You're traveling long distances over days. That turns into a lot of weight with the fatter ski. It can be a little trickier with ski crampons to get some purchase. So 100 millimeter or narrower waisted ski with some lightweight touring bindings. Split boards are not, we could talk about this a little bit. I imagine it'll happen in the Q&A, but boards are not really ideal for the Haute route specifically because of the amount of traversing and transitions that kind of happen. There's just not a ton of really pure fall line skiing like there is in other traverses in the Alps. So I have found in my years that split boarding is just not conducive to an enjoyable experience. So skis You have your avalanche gear, beacon shovel probe, possibly an airbag avalanche backpack, your skins. Ski crampons are essential on the Haute route. There's many mornings where we're leaving the hut early in the morning and the ski crampons are necessary for slippery, icy conditions. You also need boot crampons and an ice axe. Typically they can be lightweight aluminum based, but there's some mountaineering as well too. Lightweight ski touring boots, an extra pair of gloves, extra puffy jacket, a Gore-Tex jacket, sunglasses, goggles, a lightweight ski harness. So most every day you're skiing with a lightweight harness on. It is typically in the event of a crevasse fall, or if the weather is really bad and the group needs to rope up for navigation purposes to avoid a crevasse fall. So really lightweight ski touring harness, some basic carabiners and prussics, and a crevasse rescue kit for if need be. Typically, guides have very specific things they want folks to carry on that. So I'm not going to list like what I think is perfect for that, but some type of crevasse rescue gear, as well as a lightweight rope. And depending on the route taken, if it's something like the Col de Chardonnay with the big rappel, I would say like a lightweight 60-meter rope is necessary. Some of the other routes, maybe a 40-meter rope is easier to manage. A couple ice screws as well for crevasse rescue fall. Maybe a lightweight first aid kit, some type of navigation tool. These days, everything's on the phones with mapping apps. So maybe an extra battery pack to go with that. And then like really just a personal change of clothes for the huts. They have slippers, all that kind of stuff in the huts. So I tend to wear an extra cotton t-shirt and a pair of surf trunks. And that's what I bring for my hut attire throughout the week. And also being prepared for when some things go wrong. You can fix many things on the Haute route. It's good to know the options of where you can bail out, which village you can get down to, but things like a broken ski can derail your trip, especially if you're not fully prepped on what your options are and how to get out of there and what village you can find depending on which direction or valley you choose to go down to bail out of to try to get something fixed to maybe continue your tour. And carrying a little bit of extra repair gear is smart as well too. And be prepared for bad weather as well. It's not all sunshine and unicorns and powder sometimes. It can be just like whiteout essential day after day after day. Some of the key logistics challenges, I think, and I imagine this is where a lot of the Q&A chat is about to come in. But I think especially as a guide, the navigation of getting from A to B, but also like how to navigate a lot of the other logistics around the Haute route is what can make things a little bit more challenging. So how do you can get your luggage transported from Chamonix to Zermatt, and therefore you can have everything waiting for you. And typically that's a part of a guided trip where you leave Chamonix and your luggage waits for you in Zermatt, and then you can go on your way from there. It's about a 4-hour train ride back to Zermatt or back to Chamonix from Zermatt at the end of the Haute route. So sometimes people don't like to backtrack. Arranging the taxi transport to Verbier from the town of Champay after skiing is another kind of essential spot of logistics, or going to the Bourg Saint-Pierre village, but having to kind of arrange ahead of time for where to meet, what time to meet, how many people, and then where you're headed on the road break section there. Knowing the bailout options in avalanche or weather conditions. Like I talked about the one where I snapped my ski, we were able to continue the Haute route, being able to bail out to a village where I could purchase a new ski and continue on. That's not accessible everywhere, but knowing what options you have where if avalanche danger rises or the weather comes in or people in the group are feeling weak or equipment issues, whatever it might be, there needs to be an option to bail out. Knowing what all those options are every day of the route can be quite tricky, and what takes quite a lot of planning ahead of time, as well as the whiteout navigation tools with mapping apps, and then all the hut logistics of how to book each hut along the way, the phone numbers for all the huts, how to get in touch with hut keepers to rebook huts or cancel huts or reschedule different huts if the traverse. So there's a lot of kind of moving logistics that can happen along the Haute route. I think as a guide personally, I find is actually some of the most challenging work along the way. And then as we wrap up here, I noticed we just got a couple minutes left before the Q&A, but I thought it just a little how to prepare for the for the trip for folks, and a couple just little tidbits here. So generally, in regards to skill level and fitness, I would say like you really need to have prior backcountry ski touring experience. This is not a beginner backcountry ski tour. It really is for folks that are familiar with how to use their gear, because there is an endless amount of transitions, it seems like, from skinning to boot packing with skis on your back to skiing down to skinning to skiing down, that like having prior experience with backcountry ski touring and transitions is key. You also need to be a strong intermediate to advanced skier. Nothing on the Haute route necessarily is like double black diamond skiing, for example, but due to the nature of the distance, the amount of time and the elevation gain and loss throughout this ski tour, like you're gonna come across all different types of ski conditions. So it's like you kind of need to be able to ski all different types of snow, sometimes even survival skiing. So that I think is one of the most important skills for folks to be successful on the Haute route, is just being able to ski confidently in all different types of snow conditions and quality. Like I mentioned before, split boards are not ideal, just for the traversing nature of a lot of the days. And I think there are, and I've taken split boarders on much more enjoyable other high level route tours in the Alps that are better for that. And then having a good level of fitness. So being able to ski tour 7 to 1,000 meters in elevation gain every day at a roughly 3,000 meter elevation band. And key is like being able to do that day after day after day. So for like a week straight. So could you do it if you can meet the skiability and the fitness metrics? Absolutely. Do you need a guide? Not necessarily. It can definitely make your trip more enjoyable, however. Provide a level of safety, a level of like cultural immersion, and just knowledge that would make things maybe a little more enjoyable, specifically the logistics coordinating of it all. And the stronger you are, the better your experience will be. And, you know, it really is like you kind of want to, this is a trip of a lifetime for many folks. So to undertake the Haute route, like you want to enjoy it. You don't want to kind of suffer your way through every day just trying to get to the end, which can be the case. So really making sure, you know, the fitness is there. And then in regards to technical skills, like proficiency with the transitions, like I said, glacier travel, it's got glacier travel, but especially with a guide, they'll review any crevasse rescue skills. If you're not going with a guide, then you for sure need to have solid crevasse rescue skills and know how to use them, as well as being proficient with ski crampons, boot crampons, and ice axe use. So that's maybe a little bit longer than expected, but appreciate the a little bit of a extra time there. Like I said, it's a lot of information to cram in. I appreciate everybody's interest in kind of hearing my experience and a little bit of my knowledge about the Haute route. This is just a little bit about me and my company, Lotus Alpine Adventures. I guide in Chamonix and Zermatt, and I typically underdo the Haute route in springtime. I'm not going in April 2023, unfortunately. My schedule is already full, but hope to be back in 2024. And in the meantime, spend a lot of my time guiding in Colorado and yeah, around the world. So you can find out more information about me there. And in the meantime, now I believe we have probably a pretty robust question and answer session.
Yeah, Jason, that was amazing. First of all, let me just say thank you from all the hundreds of people that are here, and myself and Maya at 57 Hours and Backcountry Skiing Canada. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. That was really an incredible presentation. Somebody said, I think it was Adam said, I really appreciate that you're showing us pictures of the bad times and the hard times, whiteout conditions. So there was a lot of appreciation for just kind of keeping it real, showing the beautiful shots and the things you'll see, but then also really dialing in of like, things get hard. This is what happens. This is what we deal with. It kind of reminds everyone the importance of why we take guides, people like you who know the route, things like that. So thank you, Jason. We do have a robust Q&A session. Are you ready for it?
Let's go.
Okay,
I'll do my best.
We have more questions coming in. So questions that are coming in now, folks, I'm going to be going back and forth with Jason. So if I don't see it right away, know that I will see it, but we might not have time to get to everything. I'm just going to put that out there because we kind of already have a robust. Please, if you're adding a question in though, look at the list that's already been put in and see if it's going to be asked, just to help streamline everything on the Q&A section for me. Before we get started into Haute Route specific questions, I do want to talk a little bit about fitness and getting prepared. We had a number of questions coming in saying, I'm a piste skier, I'm an intermediate piste skier, or I resort ski in the US. And a lot of folks are wanting to make the transition to backcountry skiing. Maybe they don't have any backcountry skiing or off-piste experience yet. That is something that you just hit so hard at the end that this is not for your first time in the backcountry. How does somebody get backcountry skiing experience when they're ready to make the transition from, hey, I'm doing front country, I'm in the resorts. How do we transition to backcountry?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, and one that I think tends to get glazed over. So thanks for bringing that up. Mm-hmm. You know, depending on what part of the world you're in, usually guides are always around and offer introductions to like how to get into the backcountry. Some places like guiding companies or guides will offer courses on like introduction to backcountry skiing. And that typically will be like how to use the gear, what makes it different than resort skiing, how to put skins on, how to skin, how to travel, and just kind of like how to learn all the mechanics of all that kind of stuff. And because it can be a little bit overwhelming, like having to think about navigating avalanche conditions, especially too. Usually a guide will help fastly on how to use your gear properly. They'll also pick areas to go to where you can focus on how to use that stuff well and how to enjoy good skiing relative to whatever the avalanche danger might be as well there too. So I would say for folks that are looking to make the transition from skiing on piste to skiing off piste and getting into something much bigger like the Haute Route, to seek out a guide and really like learn how to use the gear efficiently from there moving on.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's a couple of questions coming in now, like, hey, where do I find these guides then? Friends, you're all at 57 hours now. Here, you arrived. Honestly, though, if you're out there trying to be like, well, I'm here, I'm in Europe, I'm in Canada, I'm in Revelstoke, wherever you are, we can help find you a guide. But also Jason is in Colorado. So if you make your way to Colorado, he is a wonderful resource there. And he does do guided trips across the kind of the Rockies that are out there. I'm also going to put in, and I hope this is okay, Jason, one other resource. A really wonderful guide of ours wrote an article about what is ski touring, and it was just put out like a week ago. And it also breaks down the terminology of US-based ski touring versus European-based ski touring, and it breaks down the differences between the two. Because I know we've been using words like off-piste and backcountry back and forth. So like, what are we even talking about if you're from the US? What is off-piste? So I'm putting that article in now just so you all have it. I just read it the other day and it was a really good resource. So Jason, awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. So folks, if you're out there and you're looking for a guide, Jason's around, but then also you can reach out to us, myself or Maya, just email us with your location and we'll help link you up with a guide that's certified and great to go into the backcountry with. All right, shall we jump into questions?
Keep it going.
Okay. I organized them by kind of gear questions, route questions, fitness questions, and more logistical questions. Since we were just
busy.
I was busy. My pencil is going its goal now. Since we were just talking about gear at the end, let's go ahead and jump into some gear questions. You gave a really great overview of the essentials that you bring in your backpack and your kit. What pack size do you like to put all of that into? So that's kind of the first question. We're thinking about pack size.
Yeah, great question. I tend to tell folks like greater than 30-liter pack is starting to get a little bit too big. So It really is like whatever will hold just your ski touring gear for the day. And then maybe a change of clothes and some toiletries. Sure. And that's kind of all you need. So 30-liter ski pack is ideal if you can kind of fit it in there.
Perfect. And then I know this might differ between European and US based skiers. What's your preferred ski width when you're out there?
Yes. I personally, I'm a little bit bigger and heavier as a person. I'm built probably a little bit more like a football player than a European ski tourer. So I choose a 95 millimeter waisted ski, which I feel like allows me all different conditions. Typically, you'll see over there much skinnier, even 80 millimeter skis. So, but nothing bigger than 100, and that's even almost too big.
Perfect. And then there was a question continuing on the ski trend. Are you always on telemark skis out there? What's the mounting look like for skiing out there?
Yeah, great question. I'm on alpine touring skis, and the difference obviously between telemark and alpine touring is telemark, you have the free heel. So alpine touring skis are more like an alpine based ski. So I have taken people on the Haute route with telemark skis. I will say it's a long journey when you're doing telemark turns, which is like that dropping the knee, and it's like most people end up just doing alpine turns on their telemark skis anyway. So I would highly recommend, just for the lightweight and the ease of ski ability, just like alpine touring bindings.
Okay, awesome. And then curious people want to know, what do you ski on when you're out there on the Haute route?
I have to give a shout out. I ski for DPS skis, based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. So I ski specifically only DPS skis, and I have a Pagoda 95 RP that's my Haute route ski.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, and then a couple other logistic questions on gear. The picture came up with all the different pieces of gear. Was that just one ice axe, the aluminum ice axe that you bring, or do you bring two?
Nope, just one. And it can be a lightweight aluminum ice axe, because I'm using it mostly in snow, and it should be short. So I'm a big believer in, like, it should almost fit inside your pack. None of these like 70 or 80 centimeter ice axes that they love to sell you at REI. Like, it should be 40 or 50 centimeters max, and you can put it in your pack.
Perfect. Awesome. And then let's talk about the rope. I know you mentioned that a rope is brought. There was a really specific question. Is it just one 60-meter rope that's used for everyone? Or are there a handful of 60-meter or smaller ropes that come up and are tied together if needed? Yeah, so that was just kind of the number of ropes that you need.
That's an excellent question. That's a little bit of a specific thing. And ropes, you start to ask a guide a question about, like, what's the best rope, and you're going to go down the rabbit hole for the next 6 hours. So everybody probably has their specific like preferences. For me, I would say it depends a little bit on the size of the group. So if a 60-meter rope might be a little bit more like if you want to have a rope team of 3 or 4 people. If you have a rope team, and it depends on how many people are in your group and all that sort of stuff. So 60-meter rope is actually a lot of rope to carry too. So sometimes might prefer like a 40-meter rope, and then somebody else in the group might carry another lightweight 30 or 40-meter rope in their pack. And therefore, like, you have one short rope, but if you needed to, you could tie them together, and you could have one long rope team. So it's a little bit of a tricky thing there. The biggest thing about ropes, I would say, is like the shorter you can go, the better, even if it means 2 30 or probably a 40-meter. 30-meter ropes aren't great for like big groups of ski touring. They're just too short. So maybe a couple like 40-meter ropes that are lightweight half ropes, as opposed to like one big 60-meter rope. And then the ropes are split up through the group, and it allows you a little bit more ability to, like, maybe pull out one if you need, or have a second if you also need. So that's my advice there.
Okay, perfect. And then just a couple more gear questions that are a little bit less like super specific. Somebody asked a question, and it doesn't sound like this, you needing to bring camping gear. It doesn't sound like in your pack you at all bring camping gear, but the impetus for the question is something I want to talk about. It was kind of proposed in a way that, is it always feasible, or do you anticipate it always being feasible to make it from hut to hut? Are you ever worried about getting stuck in the backcountry and needing to then survive out there?
That's an amazing question. It's always a concern, I guess. I do carry, as a guide, I carry like a little shelter, like a tarp, a rescue tarp shelter, where in the real emergency, I could dig like a snow cave and cover the roof with a shelter, and we could all pile in there for the night. And hopefully body warmth would keep us comfortable. And that's like extreme, like we can't get from A to B, we get caught in a storm.
Yeah.
And like worst case scenario, but that's kind of all that and like a little bit of fire starter kit in my repair kit, but that's it. Typically there's a lot of people on the Haute route. When the weather's bad, there's a lot of guides that are actually working together to try to help, strengthen numbers and get groups from A to B. There's a ton of options to bail out. The hut keepers themselves are amazing resources for weather and routes. So if they think the weather is going to be quite bad, they will advise what people should be doing. So I would say the plus and minus there is like the likelihood of needing full camping gear is fairly unlikely, and therefore like probably not worth the effort of carrying it the whole way. With that being said, I would carry like at least one emergency kind of bivy sack just in case.
Yeah. And that makes sense. I would say, I mean, anytime you go into the backcountry, whether you're on foot, backpacking or rock climbing, like you need to have your 10 essentials, which includes oftentimes a bivy or a tarp in the event of emergency. So that's really great advice. And then the last question I have for gear right now is somebody was asking, like, how do you manage to prepare food and hydration for 7 days? So I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, I thought about this during my presentation that I did not go on there about that. So the huts provide breakfast, and they also put out a giant thermos of like hot tea for everybody in the morning, hiker's tea. It's usually some kind of sweet black tea-ish kind of thing. So it's recommended people bring like a thermos or 1 liter water bottle, and you can fill that with hot tea every morning as part of your hut and leave. And then when you get to the huts, they provide a 3-course meal of dinner. So like an appetizer, a soup or something, and then a main course, and then a dessert. And the one thing they don't provide though is drinking water, because there's not a lot of potable water there. You have to buy bottled water as you go along the way, or sometimes it's more expensive usually than the beer or the wine actually, because all this stuff has to be helicoptered in. So typically I carry a 3/4 liter thermos for kind of hot tea every morning. And then I carry a 1 liter water bottle as well too, to kind of get me throughout the day. And like I said, we're ski touring for 4 to 7 hours ish. And then when I get to the hut, the first thing I do is usually I buy a 1.5 liters of water and kind of hydrate myself that way. So having some extra money or expenses to buy water for hydration is key. And then in regards to food, I carry just kind of snack food, to be honest, throughout the day. Like they provide you with breakfast, and then I'll carry like some chocolate, maybe a loaf of bread and some cheese that I got in Chamonix, and then got again in Verbier, and a couple snacks. Europeans they're not big believers in power food, which I think is awesome. They love real food, which I really appreciate. I think it's so much better than just living off of power food. And then when you get to the huts, you can order like that rosti picture I showed, or a soup or a bowl of pasta or something like that to add some calories until you're waiting for dinner later on. So you can literally travel with, a thermos and a water bottle, 1 liter each, and then some snack food. And then everything else is kind of included and able to be purchased along the way.
Perfect. Super helpful. So we're going to kind of teeter into a bit of like a fitness conversation. It's kind of fitness / gear / a little logistics, but we're going to kind of merges everything. Sorry, I'm looking at one question that kind of blends them all. But let's go ahead and jump into it. You gave a really clear picture of kind of the fitness that is needed and how we can get those skills and abilities if that's something you do not have. But we've talked about your skiing abilities. People ask questions, do I need to be a mountaineer? Do I need to know how to climb? Are those 2 things that are needed for this route?
You don't need to be a climber. I would say like a little bit of familiarity with like how to put on boot crampons and how to carry an ice axe and climb some snow with boot crampons on. But that just familiarity, not an expert by any means. Yeah.
That's super helpful.
It's much more the ski ability.
Okay. Now let's talk about those times when we kind of are pulling in more mountaineering skills, like when you're walking on glaciers, or you're maybe ascending a ladder or something that is really steep. and you're tied together. Are you tied together on these glaciers and on these spots when those mountaineering skills come into play?
Yeah, great question. It's another one. It's this classic guide answer. It depends.
Yeah.
um, it depends on the group and the conditions and all that. It's really like, I guess, going with a guide, and it's really their judgment based on when that stuff is needed. So typically the rope is only out when we have skis on our feet, when it's like a whiteout and we're on the glacier, and therefore like the ability to navigate around crevasses can be quite difficult. So that's when the rope might come out. But usually if it's like a clear day and you can see a lot of where the crevasses are, and having skis on your feet is significantly safer than like walking on a glacier in the summer for crevasse fall, because it distributes the force. And then in terms of some of the climbing, it really depends on the conditions. So sometimes if it's just some of the photos I showed there, if it's just like deep boot packing in kind of powder snow, the rope might not be out for helping people climb. If it's a little bit icier, more spring conditions, and I look at my folks and they just seem like they're a little bit nervous or uncomfortable, then I'll just pull the rope out and make folks a little bit more comfortable. So I would say there's no like right answer of like always in this spot, always now, always then. It's a little more like when the weather is bad or conditions are like icier than expected.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. The next kind of questions have to do a little bit more with like what we do in emergency situations, or kind of dealing with things that might happen. Is altitude sickness ever an issue with folks who take on this route? And how do you out there?
Yeah, altitude sickness definitely can catch people off guard depending on where they come from, because the huts are quite high, around 3,000 meters. So if folks are worried about that, or they're coming from lower elevation, recommending getting to Chamonix, for example, a couple days earlier, and being able to just kind of spend some time up high is really helpful. Carrying like a little bit of basic kind of altitude sickness medication is totally worthwhile. And then a lot of times, like if someone just has a completely miserable night in the hut and they don't sleep well, like rarely is it a life-threatening thing. It's more of just like extreme discomfort and lack of enjoyment. It's always an option. And I've had to bail in the morning, where instead of continuing on, we'll just ski out one of those exit valleys I talked about, and get someone to somewhere lower, and maybe we stay in town and then try to traverse back on the next day or whatnot. So it is a concern, and it does happen, but I would say like yeah.
It's kind of maybe not, and like don't let it overly consume you or the worry of it, but be prepared, and getting there early is really helpful. That's really great advice. But in those emergency situations, I know there are those exit valleys, but in the event that it doesn't have to necessarily even be altitude sickness, in emergency situations where search and rescue is needed, how does that look in Europe, especially for all of us coming from the States or from Canada that aren't as familiar with how those things happen in Europe? Can you give us a little insight into that?
Yeah, the search and rescue system in Europe is phenomenal and light years ahead of what it is here in the US. Not to knock anybody that's involved in search and rescue in the US, but it's like more government resourced over there than it is in the US. So therefore, you can buy rescue, and it's highly recommended if you're coming from the US that you have some type of global rescue insurance from a place like the American Alpine Club or something like that. A lot of times that rescue insurance will help you get from Europe back to the States. Over there, you can in Chamonix, and also through Switzerland, you can buy rescue insurance there that I highly recommend. It's like €50, and that would cover helicopter rescue if need be, to get off of whatever the injury might be. One year I had a client blow her ACL on day 3, and we were able to get her to a hospital in one of the villages. And then she was even able to it was the taxi day over to Verbier. She was even able to make it to the hut at Verbier and have dinner with us that night after getting evacuated from the mountains to the hospital, getting x-rays, being seen by doctors, and then being able to get on lifts and at least get back to the hut to have dinner with us before kind of saying goodbye to us. So rescue over there is like highly supported, really high level, quite affordable. And it really is like something that folks should buy into for €50 and then have that option.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit more. There's some logistical questions about the huts that I want to go through, and then we're going to dive into the questions about the route itself, and some of the ones that came in that I think might take a little bit more time. So let's go ahead and jump into some things about the hut. Booking the huts. I feel like I heard you mention, maybe it was in our practice run, these huts sometimes book out 2 years in advance. Is that right?
It depends on the huts. Like right now, for example, most all the huts, especially on weekends, are booked solid for the spring ski touring season this year.
Okay.
There's weekdays available. It's hard to pull off the Haute route in less than 2 weekends. So already early January, they're pretty much solidly booked.
Okay.
Each hut books a little differently. Some of them you can book online. It makes it even easier if you become a member of like the Swiss Alpine Club. And you have a membership then to get online, and you have an account and you can book all that stuff online. Some of the huts you can only book via email or only via phone call as well too. So it's a little bit, there's not one, you have to do each one individually, and each one can be a little bit different. So it takes some time.
Yeah, there was questions kind of like, do we pay ahead or do we pay there? So it does seem like each one has its own little set of rules, not rules, but kind of needs or logistics to it. So just, and the Swiss Alpine Club you recommended will help expedite that maybe a little bit, or at least
you can get access to the web, like the hut web bookings.
Okay, that sounds good. And then when you're in the hut and say you're wanting to buy that soup or have that beverage or buy the water, cash or card? Euros? What do you take?
Euros. Swiss francs, obviously, but euros are also taken. Some of the huts have credit cards. Some do not, like credit card access. Some do not. So especially like you want to carry cash for paying for the hut as well as extra incidentals like food and water.
Okay, perfect. So that kind of wraps up the hut conversation. Oh, I'm sorry, there was one question. This is a very specific question. If you're bringing a bivy sack, can you use that as your silk liner in the huts? Because I know some of the huts require your silk liner, and it's nice to have anyways. I don't know. I have not spent too many times in a bivy sack, so I guess I can't speak to the comfort of that. But
I was gonna say you could, but it might be like a wet, kind of sweaty night. So I carry like a sleeping bag sheet liner. Everybody has to. The hut requires you, and they're like super tiny.
Yeah, the silk liner like wrap up like that big.
Yeah, exactly. So that's probably more enjoyable than having to sleep in a bivy sack.
I agree. Yeah. Okay. So we're thinking about the route now. We're thinking about timing. So we're going to jump into some folks that ask questions about what about this time? What about this time? Since there is only like a 6-week window or a short window when this route is a go and y'all are doing it, does that mean it's busy out there? Are there parts of the route that are less busy, or are there parts that are kind of always consistently busy? What should the folks here expect as in the busyness?
Yeah, I would say like the hut scene is always busy, like some of those photos I showed. And in terms of the route, any of the technical sections can be a little bit more of a bottleneck, like the rappel off the Col de Chardonnay, or the boot pack up the Col de Passon, or the Col de Brûlé, the climb up the Peñarola. Like some of the technical sections will just slow everybody down. So people tend to get caught up in groups. But a lot of it really just totally depends on the luck of the draw. Some days you leave the hut and everybody might leave the hut together, and then different groups just move at different speeds. And I've definitely like left the hut with like 40 other people and found myself with my group pretty much skiing on our own all day until we got to the next hut. And then other days I've felt like I've just been in the train of people at every transition, at every section all along the way. So a lot of it really depends on just kind of how the timing of the day works out. Everybody is definitely leaves early in the morning, especially the guides. So getting a little bit more of a quiet ski touring experience would just mean leaving the hut a little bit later. But then, it has its own risks in and of itself there, the later you leave. So, but the hut scene itself, I would say, is never quiet.
Yeah, but it sounds fun. Like it sounds
Totally.
fun. It sounds like entertaining and like energetic. It's not
Yeah.
you're not there for your
Embrace the
sins.
social aspect.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. It's kind of the flip of what we oftentimes think about when we go out into the backcountry. No, there was
Yeah.
a question, and I'm going to go ahead and ask it now. When you say early morning, what's your preferred alpine start on the Haute route?
My preferred alpine start would be like 10 a.m. with like extra espresso in the morning, but that's not necessarily what I get to do. um, it seems like leaving the hut by 8 a.m. to be honest. Maybe there's a few of those huts, like I mentioned, the one I think we try to leave at 7 a.m. Before to get up and out, but I would say like no earlier really than 7 a.m.
Okay.
Is
So it's not
necessary.
wild. We're not like a
No,
3
it's not like, yeah, not a 3 or 4 a.m. kind
alpine.
of thing.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
A
Perfect.
civilized alpine start.
I like that. I think we should start using that civilized alpine start 7 a.m. Perfect. And then somebody asked specifically, what do you think about February for doing the Haute route?
You could do it. The problem is some of the huts aren't going to be open
Okay.
in February. So you would have to bring like full camping gear, and then it would be a completely different experience than what I've had, where it would be much more wilderness committing. You'd be out there on your own, but a lot of the huts aren't actually available to link the whole ski tour in February, mostly because avalanche danger is just too high. And that's why it typically tends to just be a springtime thing.
Everything gets put back together. Okay, so let's talk about that safety though in finding avalanche snowfall conditions. You mentioned earlier the hut keepers are a wonderful resource for what's happening in the alpine environment. What other resources do you use or do you recommend using to monitor snowfall, weather, avalanche conditions on the route?
Yeah, usually the hut keepers. They tend to have access through like the internet. All of them. That's how they understand. That's how they get all their booking stuff. So they have access to weather reports and avalanche forecasts that they update in the hut every morning and every evening for the entire hut. And then, as a guide, we get a little bit of a back door into like talking a little bit more specifics about what the hut keeper's hearing from other guides or other hut keepers along the route. And we'll share information with guides as well too. So I feel like I probably have access to a little bit more than just the public would. But in general, every hut posts the avalanche danger and the weather forecast every night and every morning for folks. And then a lot of it's just evaluating conditions as you go along the day.
And then let's think about this year. Somebody asked a really great question. How's the route shaping up for this year? I know it's early in the season. I know there's not a lot of snow in the Alps, but your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to say. I think I haven't been on the Haute route in a few seasons because of COVID. Also, last year I was in the Alps, but not on the Haute route. I think let's see, it's been a dry couple winters over there and then a really hot summer. So the snowfall on the glaciers as well as the glaciers themselves just continuing to melt and recede is making conditions more technical. So I would say like some of those boot pack climbs or sometimes now are on dry rock with fixed ropes, and that gets a little bit more technical. The glaciers are getting drier. The crevasse hazard can be more without the snowfall. And then like a lot of the exits down the valleys, like the Valley Blanche, down to Champagne, like we might not able to ski as far as we used to, and you might just have to kind of walk. So the Alps did just get a ton of snow, and it seems like it is like full winter there again right now, but it's a little bit it has to keep up, I would say. Otherwise, it would be a doable traverse this spring for sure, but it just might be some added kind of like scrappiness to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, can you speak a little bit? There was a question and a couple of people one up this. Can you speak on, and if you're comfortable doing this, just kind of how climate change is affecting things in the Alps right now and just kind of your take on it, what's happening there? Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I think I first went to the Alps in 2008. So roughly like, 10 plus year, which is a very short amount of time compared to like, guides that make their living and live over there full time. But out of all the places I've been in the planet, which is most all the continents in glaciated terrain, the Alps are the amount of climate change happening over there seems to be more rapid and more astronomical than anywhere else I've witnessed. Where even in my decade plus, I've seen massive changes happening over there. And it's in the realm of not being able to ski down to the valleys as much as used to be done. Conditions tend to get icier and drier than they used to be. Crevasses and ice falls and the glaciers just are a little bit more dangerous. And the rockfall hazard is much more dangerous as now as well too, unfortunately. So it's kind of heartbreaking. I think the Alps are they seem like ground zero right now in my experience for how much climate change is affecting how the mountains are changing and the hazards that you have to deal with traveling through the mountains now.
Yeah. I think that's such an important note to mention, that the routes are changing. Things do feel different in the Alps. I know they closed Mont Blanc this past climbing season,
Yep.
which is pretty intense. So definitely paying attention to how the route is changing, how things might be different, I think is really important for even this route that's done primarily in the snow. Well, let's jump back into a few more route questions. Kind of a very standard one. Can you do it in reverse, Zermatt?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I've always wanted to actually. You can do it in reverse completely. And I think it would be a totally different experience. And you would be going kind of like a salmon swimming upriver. It would probably have a little bit less like descending or some of the classic like ski descents, but it is done in reverse. And every 2 years, the Patriote Glacier, which is like a famous randonnée race, goes from Zermatt to Verbier in reverse. Just in that realm itself. So it can totally be done that way.
Yeah, I love it. Another question. Sorry, I'm looking at, there's new questions coming in, so I'm sure I'm kind of swooping at everything.
People are still tuned in. That's a good sign.
But we still have 160 people on the call. Woo, wild. We were thinking about the logistics. So there's a question here that, of course, like taking a guide is one way to make all your logistics easy. Like, how am I going to get there? How am I going to book the huts? How am I going to do all this? Some people are interested in kind of like a partial. They maybe want to traverse it on their own, but they want some support with logistics, like getting to Chamonix, getting on the mountain, getting the huts booked. Do you know of any services or do any guides that you know of help with the logistic side? And then they go and tour on their own. So it's kind of like a partial support. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know of any services specifically that offer that, but you certainly could. I think that there are plenty of guides that would probably be willing to do something like that. It's probably a little bit more than like a standard travel agent would be able to help somebody with. I would say for any type of logistical support, it should be somebody that is like based in Europe, in either Zermatt or Chamonix, just because anybody that's not based in the exact same time zone, if logistics get squirrely and like you have to change and you want someone to take care of that for you, like you want them to be, accessed right away. So I know specifically as a guide that's worked for companies over there, a lot of times like we have just hired a ground logistics person to help manage huts and stuff like that and client travel needs along as with guides. So it is an option. You might just have to get creative and trying to find someone to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And then thinking about those folks that are traversing it on their own, or maybe they're traversing it with a guide and you're just a big map nerd like I am. What's the best navigation tool that you like to use when you're out there? Some folks recommended Fat Map or Gaia GPS. What do you use out there?
Yeah, I've been using Gaia and with the Swiss Topo, like the Swiss Topo maps as the downloaded layers. Those maps are phenomenal. They have the ski routes right on them. Fat Map's a great resource too. I'm just not as familiar with it. So.
Perfect. Awesome. And then when we're now going to jump into some really specific questions about the route. So can you estimate what the average daily vertical might be for somebody out there? It doesn't have to be day by day, but what should kind of somebody mentally be ready for vertical wise?
I would say mentally 900 meters of ascent a day would be kind of average. I think there's a few days where it might be a little bit more, but there's also maybe a couple days where it could be a little bit less. So I would say for an average, roughly like 900 meters a day.
Yeah, and I'm not mathing it on the computer right now, but that's like 2,000 to 3,000 feet.
Yeah, probably a little closer to 3,000 feet.
3,000. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And then a question about Verbier. Is it possible to get there in a single day? Can you do a single day push there? You are more familiar that question, yeah.
Yeah, some people do that. There's definitely like all these speed ascents of the Haute route right now, and there's even some folks that are trying to guide it much quicker. But you could, in a push, get from Argentière all the way to Verbier in a day, especially if you had your taxi all lined up ahead of time. It would depend a little bit on conditions, because skiing down the Val d'Arpet to Champay, it's like if I remember right, it's east facing. And so you just kind of like in the springtime with some south facing terrain above you and avalanche danger and all that, you wouldn't want to be there really late in a warm day. I guess that would be quite a dangerous ski descent. So condition depending though, for sure, someone that's super fit could go from Argentière to Verbier in a day.
Awesome. And then we're thinking again about the route here. Are there any like what somebody's calling a no-fall zone, where it's like we cannot mess up here?
Yes.
Are there spots?
Yeah, there's a few of those. Probably the most famous is the Serpentine, it's called, on the climb up the Pina de Arola, where it's a really steep, kind of narrow section that usually is ski crampons, sometimes boot and ice axe. And it's this like S-shape kind of zone you got to traverse through with some crevasses. And if you fell there in the wrong conditions, it could be really bad. That's one example that I can think of. I would say and that's more on the ascent. I don't think there's not many of ski descents that are no fall zones. It might be a little bit more of like kind of some of the uphill travel. And that's again where hence the crampons and ice axe and maybe a rope.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, so a couple other questions coming in. Thinking about age requirements, folks were asking about age on the high and the low end. I did reply to somebody on the high end and say age is just a number. But if you want to speak a little bit about age requirements or kind of where you've seen it fall on the low end and high end, and how best to navigate that.
Yeah, I agree. Age is just a number, and it all depends on how fit somebody is and how strong they feel, mentally as well too. I've seen folks, I've definitely seen families on this, and I wouldn't put a quite age, but 15, 16, 14 for young, maybe 13, depending on how much ski touring experience they have. And then at the upper end, I'd say there's no limit. It'd be amazing to see somebody 90 years old doing the Haute route, and I would say if they are healthy and fit enough, by all means. And I've seen quite a few folks, I would argue, are probably in their 70s on the Haute route. So
there's somebody on here who was like, I'm 65, I've done it.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so the last couple questions coming in, they're going to kind of popcorn around a little bit. So just let me go back over. When we're thinking about technical climbing in kind of those no-fall zones, and those really, really in more kind of intense mountaineering points, are they just on the standard route, or do we find them on some of the alternative routes? What does that look like when we start to throw in some of the alt routes?
Yeah, so the Verbier route, which is known as the skiers route, and that's the one I talked about, and that's the one that has these sections. I think if you get into even more of the alternates, like the Classic or the Grand Louis, you get more of that terrain, more technical mountaineering style pieces of the puzzle to put together than you do on the Verbier. So they get more than less, I'd say.
Perfect. And then when we're thinking about the route overall, do you think, what do you think is technically the hardest part of it? Is it climbing? Is it roping? Is it ascending? What do you think, like mentally kind of preparing people? What's the hardest part?
That's an interesting question. In my experience of having done the Haute route, probably a dozen times with people, I think the two that I have noticed people struggle with the most are the mental aspect of how long it is. So like, especially when the weather is not great, it can just be a little bit more challenging, but it's like every day, like you do get a little bit beat down physically. And when you have the views and the social scene and it's sunny, it's easy to like survive a little bit of that mental stress. But when it's like the weather's bad and it's like you're kind of slogging and you don't get these like stunning views and everybody's like working a little harder and suffering a little bit more, then I think like the mental aspect of just the difficulty of day after day for a week is what wears people down. So that's one. And then I think the other physically is the ability to ski all different types of conditions every day, day after day after day. That's the other, like, that's harder than any of the technical climbing.
Yeah. You mentioned that earlier, the variability, you have to be able to ski it all. And there's really not an option once you're out there. You got to ski it. Yeah. And that mental side is so important. It is really easy to keep going when skies are blue, good vibes are happening, but how we react once things are hard. One might say when you return back home, those memories are even fonder. Extreme type 2 memories, which is good. Okay. Thinking about time of year, when is your favorite time to do this route?
Oh boy. I think that's a great question. First week of April is probably like my ideal week. I think that I've done it everything from like the last 2 weeks of March through the first 3 weeks of April. And it seems to me like the first week of April seems to be, in my experience, I've gotten the best weather and the best ski conditions. A little bit earlier, it's been a little bit stormier and colder. And then a little bit later, it's been typically more spring-like and maybe nicer weather, but like much more challenging kind of spring ski conditions, like frozen every morning and just like pure corn skiing. So, but it's a total gamble. And, you know, with climate change, that's a whole nother thing as well too. So
yeah. One last logistical question, and then I'm just going to have you speak again on kind of the things that you offer, just to clarify all of that. Do you ever have anyone bring a second set of skins to switch out throughout the day?
No, I haven't. I mean, you could. I haven't needed that necessarily. I think like usually a pair of skins will get through the day and then you can dry them out at the huts, and therefore like they're ready to go for the next day. So I'm a little bit more of a believer of like really good craftsmanship around managing your skins in snowy, cold conditions will go just as far as like carrying a backup pair in case something goes wrong. So
that makes sense. Perfect.
Having some tools, I will add though, having some tools to fix some things. I have had like skin tails and skin tips break in the field, and therefore like having some simple tools to like rig up a new tip attachment or tail attachment. I actually am still skiing on a pair of skins that I had to fix on the Haute route with some zip ties on the tip attachment that tore off, and I'm actually still skiing on them. I just have been lazy.
It works.
So,
I guess.
Yep.
Love it. That's great. So that pretty much wraps up all of our questions. Jason, you did a fantastic job. I think you just went through like 57 different questions, which is incredible. So kudos to you. For those
Thanks for moderating it.
Yeah. For those of you asking, this is being recorded. Maya said to me that it should be ready next week, just so you all know, and this will land in your inbox. She'll also in a little bit put the link, some of you have probably already seen it too, the link to our YouTube. If you like and subscribe to our channel, you'll also be able to get like the immediate, oh, the presentation is live. So that's a really great spot to find that. That's where all of our webinars live, which is super cool. Then there are a couple questions coming in about like, wait, do you offer this trip 57 hours? Does Jason offer this trip? Is this just for people planning to do it on their own? The truth is we offer it. Jason will offer it in the future. And you can do it on your own also. So somebody was like, wait, is this a webinar for people that want to do it on their own or go guided? We support whatever adventure.
All of it.
Yeah, all of it. So if you're looking for a guide to do the hot route, we got you. If you're looking to do this on your own, hopefully this gave you a lot of information. Jason, I wanted to give you one more chance to talk about what you're hoping to offer in 2024 for the Haute route, and just kind of open that back up again so they know a little bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I typically, my company, Lotus Alpine Adventures, which is mostly just me, unless I bring someone with me. We will hopefully be back in the Alps next spring. I've been juggling a little bit of spring ski touring in the Alps with helicopter ski guiding in Alaska in the spring, and there's just like not enough time to do it all. So my hope is in 2024 to offer a Haute route for folks that, you know, will probably start planning and booking in the fall of 2023. Mm-hmm. And as well as maybe some other ski tours over there, for example, in Austria and Switzerland and places like that. So, and in the meantime, I work specifically in Colorado for the rest of the winter. And I also highly recommend, like, if folks want to go over there and they're anywhere near Colorado or anything like that, like having some ski days around here to just, I've done a lot of like kind of assessment shakeout days with folks to be like, that aren't quite sure if they maybe have the skills or the fitness or the ski ability to go do the Haute route. And they, although we don't have glaciers in Colorado, we do have the altitude, and therefore we can ski over 3,000 meters for days on end. And we do have some huts here as well too, that although different, allows a similar kind of training experience for folks. So
yeah, that's really great. Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up all of our questions. I just wanted to give you a chance to kind of talk about your offerings and clarify for folks out there kind of how things work here and the webinar and why we're here to talk about the Haute route. Maya, before I ask Jason if he has any last words, I want to ask you if there's any last things you'd like to add in from your side.
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Jason, for doing this with us. It was really an amazing webinar. And I see the chat is blowing up. People are really grateful for all the information and knowledge that you have shared. So thank you very much. It's been a blast, really.
Yeah. Jason, before I turn it back over to you one more time, yeah, the chat, I hope you can see it, Jason. Can you? The chat box blowing up?
A little bit, yeah.
Good. But I just want to say thank you again to Jason, but also Backcountry Skiing Canada for being our partner in this. You guys are awesome. But Jason, now for you, any last words for our wonderful attendees? There's still 110 of them here today.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm super humbled that everybody's so interested and still sticking around to hear what I have to say. So that's great. I kept that many people engaged. Thank you to 57 Hours for putting this on, and super awesome to like to put this information out there to folks and to offer this kind of like experience. So thank you guys so much for that. And if folks ever have any other questions or whatnot, you can reach out to 57 Hours. You can reach out to me through my website, Lotus Alpine Adventures, or on the social medias and all that. And yeah, thank you guys so much. It's an honor to be a part of it.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps everything up. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you all for your enthusiasm and spirit. We couldn't do it without you all. So yeah, have a wonderful evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Enjoy.